In the previous episode, we learned of the near-impossible task Virvarman, the Cholan emperor, had given Raj Guru Kachigan and General Sridhar. Today, we move forward to the time the Cholans finally meet Pari's Velirs, near Piran Malai, the capital of Parambu Nadu. Pari had suffered a terrible defeat at the Battle of Mathari Hills, a defeat inflicted on him by Moradun, the Cholan warlord, who was secretly fighting on behalf of Kachigan. Now, the Cholan army has appeared over the horizon, and was gathering on the plains that stretched from the foothills of Piran Malai. Many Velir chieftains defected to the Cholan side. There were several exceptions, who remained loyal to Pari, including the Malaiyamaans. Prince Deiveegan, of the Velir house of Malayaman, volunteered to come to Piran Malai's aid. But Pari had dissuaded him, and said, "Remain in your father's princedom, and protect your people from Cholan ravages." Deiveegan reluctantly agreed, and returned to defend his homeland. In the first military engagement, the Cholans outwitted the Velirs, who then abandoned the field. Pari lost the strategic Keel-Malai Lake, the primary water source for Piran Malai. The Cholans could have raced up the hill slopes and taken the capital. But they were stopped by the formidable defenses that Pari had erected on the slopes. Narrow trenches crisscrossed the hill slopes. Velir auxiliaries, hiding in these trenches, shot wave after wave of arrows, and also lobbed rocks. They stopped the Cholans. The Velirs had also readied other traps. If the enemy overwhelmed the first row of trenches, the Velirs would withdraw to the second row, and the third row, and so on. And each time the Velirs withdrew, they planned to pull up the floorboards, exposing the sharpened spikes beneath. The enemy attackers risked felling in, and skewering themselves to death. Tinder also filled the bottom of the trenches, and lighted arrows fired by the Velirs would ignite flames, forming a solid wall of fire. By such means, Pari hoped to fend off the Cholan advance. Meanwhile, the bulk of the defenders withdrew to the hilltop fortress city, and waited behind high walls. All in all, Pari had thrown up a formidable defense. The Cholans and their allies, the Cherans and Pandyans, halted. Kachigan's spies, who had infiltrated into Piran Malai, learned of the defensive traps on the hill slopes. Advised by Kachigan, who was the brains behind the Moo-Vendhar strategy, the attackers halted. But they tested Pari's defenses. How did the Moo-Vendhar test the Velir's defenses? Let us hear what their generals had to say, and we'll know what they did. "We can't use cavalry on the forested slopes," said General Sridhar, Cholan army commander. "Send in the infantry," said General Omanan, Cheran army commander. "Our foot soldiers will suffer heavy casualties," added General Thithan of the Pandyan army. "I suggested foot soldiers," said the Cheran general, "but not our foot soldiers." Cheran Maharajan Venkatavan argued with his brother monarchs to commit the Velir auxiliaries first. He said, "Let the Velir defectors prove their loyalty to our cause. Send them up to test Pari's defenses. They will be the live bait to discover the hidden dangers before committing our men." The first waves of assault troops, composed of traitorous Velirs, pushed back Pari's defenders, but they also died in their thousands in the trenches. While the three kings planned how best to overcome Pari's defenses, they also laid siege on Piran Malai. They cut off all supplies from reaching the capital. Food and water became scarce, and refugees filled Piran Malai. People slept, and did their toilet on the streets. The beautiful city quickly gave over to filth and stench. Tension grew between the wealthy local residents and the refugees, who were mostly rough people from the villages. The Cholans retained the young people among the refugees, and put them to work, digging trenches, burying the dead, and carrying water, said Chitragundan, the Parambu Nadu Prime Minister. "The infirmary is overflowing with wounded," said Jagapathirar, the royal physician. "I'm forced to place the sick out on the streets. Without water, without sanitation, more people are dying from diseases than war wounds." The Cholans allowed only the old and the sick refugees through, and also children, to go up to Piran Malai. These refugees became a burden to Pari, ate into his meager supplies. They also carried tales of Velir villages in the countryside, ravaged by Cholan marauders. This further demoralized the soldiers in Piran Malai, who feared for the safety of their loved ones in the villages. No food, no water, no medical supplies, but plenty of bad news about villages burned to the ground, and people slaughtered, across the countryside. When Velir, acting as Pari's ambassador, confronted his former employer, Cholan, the latter denied all wrongdoing. His excuse: the Cholans answer to no one. Not even to the Cholan throne. But we are trying to pacify the countryside. The quicker Pari surrenders, the earlier the Cholan army can turn its attention to reining in the bandits. This was total war, starvation, disease, battles in the field, surreptitious raids on the farmlands in the rear, and psychological warfare, all unleashed on Velir Pari by his powerful enemies. And the brains behind this strategy was none other than Cholan, the Cholan Raj Guru and royal advisor. He broke the rules of war, but always blaming the brigands for the atrocities. He was also painstakingly working himself into the good books of Emperor Velir, his biological son. Meanwhile, the Emperor Cholan and his allies, the Chera and Pandya, kept their hands clean. They either did not know or chose not to confront Cholan. How long can the Piran Malai defenders hold out? How did Pari succumb? Do you still think Pari was a victim of treachery committed by the Moo-Vendhar? Did he fight, and fell, in a glorious last stand against overwhelming odds? Join me again for the concluding episode next. Until then, goodbye for now.